Good morning and welcome to the Supportive Housing Net Workshop this morning. Good to see all of you. Today we have two wonderful guests from the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York, Brian Loeb, Community Investment Policy and Research Advisor, and Jacob Day, Community Investment Business Development Associate. Thank you both for joining us. The Federal Home Loan Bank has been an incredible resource for acquisition, construction, and rehab of affordable and supportive housing, and we are so grateful for their partnership. The 21 funding round will have a greater focus on supportive housing and its scoring criteria, and today's webinar is an opportunity to hear more about what to expect. Brian and Jacob, thank you so much for being here with us, and I will pass it off to you.
Well, thanks so much, Laura, and thank you to the network for having us. As you just heard, my name is Brian Loeb. I'm a policy and research advisor for the Community Investment Group at the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York. That means I work on our two main community investment programs, the Affordable Housing Program, which you'll hear about today, and the Homebuyer Dream Program, our program that provides down payment and closing cost assistance for low and moderate income first-time home buyers. I do all kinds of research and policy initiatives around improving the programs so they better address needs that we've identified in our district, which includes not only New York State, but also New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And I work very closely with my colleague who's here today, Jacob Day, and I'd love for him to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much again to the network for having us. My name is Jacob Day. I'm a Community Investment Business Development Associate. In that role, I work very closely with Brian on the policy and outreach and research initiatives in order to further enhance and refine our affordable housing program, which we'll be talking about this morning, and of course, our Homebuyer Dream Program, first home purchase down payment assistance program. We're going to be focusing a lot today on our new scoring criteria. The network actually was instrumental over the course of the last year in helping us refine some scoring categories related to supportive housing, which we're really excited to tell you about. So thanks again. Happy to be here and happy to share some good news in the supportive housing development world.
Thanks, Jacob. So, assuming everyone can see screen now, looks okay, great. So we're going to be talking about what is new to the AHP this year, but for folks who have perhaps less experience with the program, certainly we'll give you a good grounding in the program basics as well. None of this is to take the place of very detailed and important technical assistance training webinars that are to come late in February and throughout March. You'll be getting those announcements soon. The dates for those will indicate which ones are targeted at New York State. Others will be targeted at other areas of our district. We'd like you to sign up for the New York State ones. They'll have some specific statistics and guidance relevant to New York projects, although if you can't make that particular date, certainly the others would be helpful as well. As it says here on the slide, we expect to launch sometime in the second quarter. We tried to launch a little earlier last year. Next year, this year is a bit later. You know, all kinds of factors go into that, but what it means is that you have time now to get on the website, look at the implementation plan, look at what's changed, and start thinking about your project with a little more lead time than you would have had in years past. And it also means that you have time to speak with our team of analysts, and we have the email address down there at the bottom. You should seek out technical assistance on your project, especially where the criteria or the documentation requirements that you see in the implementation plan aren't as clear as we may hope, and to discuss any nuances or unique aspects of your own project that we might not have anticipated. That really gives the analysts a heads up when your application comes in. They know what they're looking for. That's really helpful. So use this time this extra time during this spring to get started understanding the program components. As Laura and Jacob said, the changes that we've made to a part of the program, namely the competitive scoring aspect, we anticipate and we hope will be to the benefit of supportive housing projects. We've identified it consistently as a high priority need in the district in our annual targeted community lending plan. Thanks to the advocacy of the network, many project sponsors throughout New York and other parts of the district. So just to step back for a second to talk about what is the AHP. It funds acquisition, construction, and rehab of affordable housing projects through one of our member financial institutions. So it turns out most of the projects that we fund are within our district of New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. But the key is that you have the access point is one of our member banks or credit unions or CDFIs, and there's a complete listing of those on the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York website. So once in a while, we do have projects that take place outside of our district, but they're partnerships with one of our members. So though if you're not already very close with one of our members, and we'll get into an added benefit of that close partnership later when Jacob goes through the scoring criteria. But if you're not already close to a potential member or partner for your project, you should start now on that as well. So in the rental world, most projects are primarily affordable, although we do allow some share of the units to be market rate or for middle income tenants. Although in the owner occupied world, all the units need to be for households earning at 80% or below of the area median income. Now the implementation plan, which I mentioned that's on our website right now, goes through all the different qualifications that a sponsor organization must meet to submit a project application via one of our member institutions. And it also talks about some of the eligibility requirements that just get the project in the door. And that's things like the sponsor organization's experience and their ability to demonstrate site control for the project, whether it's a single site or a scattered site project. This year, consistent with recent years, the most any given project can ask for is up to $40,000 per unit, and we have another cap, which is $2.5 million per project. We don't often see awards that are that high. The average project, in recent years has been about $1 million, but it could be much lower or much higher depending on your project's need. One thing to note back way up at the top of the slide is that our funds go toward acquisition, construction, or rehab. That's really where they need to show up in your capital stack. We know and we expect that on a supportive housing project, you have all kinds of operational needs. That's not, unfortunately, what our funds can go towards. Most of our projects in New York see partnerships with ESHI or kind of similar operational partners, but our funds are really for the hard costs. Last thing to note is that receiving an award through the AHP is really the beginning of a very long partnership, and the commitments you make at application really carry through for many years, especially on a rental project. Similar to a tax credit award, we'll be checking in and having you certify many aspects of the project for quite a number of years afterwards. And so, it's something to think about when you're training your staff, preparing for turnover, that you really are able to keep up the promises you've made at application and understand kind of the documentation commitments you're making for those years of the retention period. All right. We made the choice beginning in the 2018 AHP round to have supportive housing as its own category within our scoring framework. And the scoring framework is what we use once projects demonstrate eligibility for the program. Then we rank the applications against each other using a scoring framework. We typically get 2.5, 3 times as many applications as we're able to give out awards, and so we have designed the scoring framework to reflect, we think, our priorities and the district needs that we've identified. And for quite a number of years, one of those has been supportive housing for special needs populations. So that category will remain in this year's round, and it requires that your project reserve at least 20% of the units for one of these populations that you see here on the screen. As Jacob will tell you, we've done a bit more this year in increasing the reward you get for targeting these kinds of populations. But the key thing to pay attention to is this last bullet. The documentation requirements are very specific. Not only do you have to reserve the units for one or more of these populations, but you really have to give us confidence that those supportive services are going to be delivered. And the way you do that is by submitting at application your social services plan and a fully executed agreement with the social service provider. And if you yourself are providing the services, there's a way for you to document that as well. So how have we done? We think supportive housing is pretty well supported, for lack of a better word, in the program in recent years, and we'd like to see that only grow. You'll see here on the screen that about 1/5 of the units that we've funded in the last 3 years have been reserved for one of these special needs populations. If you compare New York and New Jersey supportive housing projects, probably no surprise given the funding partners and the scale of the need. You see projects for supportive housing in New York tend to be quite a bit bigger than those in New Jersey. But we expect that with the changes that Jacob is going to describe a bit later, that these percentages will only go up, this year and in future years. The past set of scoring criteria, the ones we adopted in 2018, stayed in place for 3 years. We try not to make big changes too often, and so you should expect that the rules of the road as you see them in the implementation plan on our website will stick around for at least a couple years. We're always able and willing to tweak them to fix issues that come up that we didn't anticipate, but we've made quite a few significant changes this year, and it's not something that we really want to do every year. So Jacob's going to take over from here, walk you through the details of the scoring criteria as you'll see them for this year, and then I'll come back on in a bit later to give you some tips for thinking about your application.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And just point out, we're already getting some really great questions in the Q&A box. I think what we'll do is, if there's simple stuff we can answer yes or no, Brian, I'll kind of take turns doing that. But there are some things that I'm seeing coming in especially about the 20%. So we'll talk about that when we do a deep dive on the supportive housing component of our program. But, keep those questions coming in. We're logging those, we're keeping an eye on those, and we'll also have our contact info up at the end. So whatever we can't get to today, we're always available. But looks like some good questions so far. So I want to just take a quick look at sort of the trajectory for how projects come in, how we review them, how they're scored, how we get to that final award phase. So when the analysts review your application this summer, this is the phases that they'll go through, and you can see the success rate during each phase. So project eligibility, 98% of the projects that we get of our batch pass that, right? So that's, as Brian mentioned, that you have the site control, you have the minimum 20% of units for very low income, the sponsor is qualified, you have your development budget, your construction manager has signed off and everything. Pretty basic stuff, right? So that's, you know, the 2% that aren't passing that threshold are really just not, you know, prepared to submit an AHP application, aren't quite ready. But for most of you out there, getting past the eligibility isn't going to be an issue. It's when we get to project scoring where it gets very competitive. So we receive about, you know, anywhere from 100 to 120 applications every year. Not really sure what to expect this year. You know, we know there's obviously always the need for supportive housing, unaffordable housing, but it's just always really hard to predict, you know, how many applications we're going to get, but no reason to think it would be any less than normal. So project scoring is when the analysts take a deep dive looking at, you know, that supportive housing component. Do you have that 20% of units? Is that reflected on your rent plan? Do you have the supportive housing agreement, the social services plan, things like that? Is your homeless housing also documented as lined out in our implementation plan and when you get the application workbook? So that's really the area where we're looking to see that of this 100-point scale, you know, where do you fall on that? And this is when you see a lot of drop off. And most of the time, you know, it's you just didn't apply for enough points, or you didn't provide supporting documentation to back up the claims you were making in the application. And sometimes you just weren't competitive. You know, like I said, the scoring is very close. And when we talk about the increase in points in some of the categories, I'll explain why, you know, even a point or two can make a huge difference. So once you get through the project scoring phase, that's where we've narrowed it down to really, you know, most of the projects are going to get that award, are going to be an alternate. But after project scoring is when we do our really deep underwrite of all the applications that have made it into the financial review, passed through that project scoring phase. This is really, you know, by this point, we've taken a close look at your project. Now we begin to really look at the financials, look at the operating expenses that have been projected, look at any financial commitments you might have already secured. We might have to talk to other funders. We actually work really close with eShy at this phase. If you have their voucher in there, their subsidy in there, we see inconsistencies with the budgets you're presenting, you know, things like that. So the financial review period is really when we hammer down and take a really hard look at the project to make sure it matches our financial feasibility guidelines in terms of developer fees, you know, reserves. We have our own guidelines. If that stuff doesn't line up with what your other funders are requiring, we'll work with them to kind of figure that out. But financial review, if you make it that far and you start to engage, you'll get an awful lot of questions for our analysts, and that's really designed just to make sure that the project is gonna fit with our program and also be able to hit those benchmarks over time that we have for our progress reporting requirements. So we'll move on to talk a little bit more about scoring now and some of the changes. Brian, I think, you know, if you could advance one. There we go. So we spent the last year, Brian and I, and a few other analysts and managers at Federal Home Loan Bank, taking a close look at the AHP scoring framework. So if you've been working with us for quite some time now, you know that every few years we like to shake things up a little bit, mainly because we are always assessing what kind of projects are coming in, what do the district needs look like, what are we getting wrong, what are we getting right. So right here you have our scoring framework, the whole overview of it, and we'll go into some of these in detail. I just wanted to give everyone a chance to just take a look at this. You can see some of the classics that we always have: the donated properties, sponsorship, targeting. Those are still going to make up you know, a significant amount of points there. What I want to point out specifically to the network today and to the viewers at home is the increase in the amount of points there for supportive housing. You can see it's going up to 6 points. from 5. Now, that may not seem like a big increase, but it really is, because we found that when we get to those projects, that 40% that get into the scoring review and then go on to the financial review, the underwriting, the bottom 10 or 15, and especially the alternates coming out, those can be separated by tenths of a point, right? It's very, very tight there. Excuse me, it's very, very tight there at the bottom. So 1 point, can jump you up 10 places, right, and get you into that award category. So it's really not just the empty gesture to give more points to that category. It really is a significant recognizing the need for that and wanting to encourage these projects. So I think that when you're doing your self-score at home and putting your project together, kind of keep that in mind. Since we're doing so many new scoring categories, and we'll also talk about things we're refining and things we're phasing out, it's going to be really hard for us to predict what the scoring range will look like this year. So when you're doing your self-scoring and you're trying to project out what your score might be, I wouldn't compare it to last year's scores. I wouldn't compare it to the score you got last year if you applied. We're really entering new territory with this one. So I think we'll move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the newer scoring categories that we've got. So just talked about the increase to 6 points for supportive housing. So hopefully that will benefit you guys a lot when you're putting your application in. We took a look at our eligible supported housing populations, and I do want to point out, I saw some of the Q&A. So homeless housing is also going to go up a point again, recognizing that the real need for that type of subsidy. Those are distinct categories. Most of that is for regulatory reasons, the way that the Federal Housing Finance Agency, who oversees our banks, structures the categories. We have some flexibility. Some things are a little bit more set in stone. They did change the framework around a little bit this year, but we keep homeless and supportive as separate categories for a lot of reasons. But I know that sometimes can kind of conflict with some of the programs you're working with in New York. But we've just found that if we treat those as separate categories, it gives providers who are just doing homeless housing, the opportunity to pick up those points as well. So when you get your application, when you're talking to Brian or I or to the analyst about how you put your application together, really keep in mind that those are two separate scoring categories. They have different documentation requirements. There may be some overlap in the documentation that you could use to prove both categories. But just keep in mind, they are distinct scoring categories for our purposes, how we review the application. As you've seen, we have a bucket of special needs populations that we will recognize. They're probably a little bit different from ESHI. We worked with them to kind of line up, but we are a little bit different. But this year we are adding youth aging out of foster care as a special needs population. And part of our year-long effort of refining this AHP scoring framework was talking to a lot of supportive housing providers in the district. As Brian said, it includes New Jersey and USVI, Puerto Rico. So we wanted to make sure we touched upon all those organizations all over our district and found that this was really a special needs population that we could include in our scoring framework, but it would also make sense from a documentation standpoint and a volume of applications that we'd be getting applications throughout the district to serve this population. So increase in points for supportive housing, new population, increase in homeless housing, the percentage of units there for homeless housing not changing, still 20%. That category will be fixed now at homeless housing. Just like supportive housing, you get the 6 points as long as you're doing the 20%. That's a little bit different than last year where it was variable. So you would have had to do more homeless housing units in order to get those full, as it was back then, 5 points. Now we're making it a little bit easier. We just want to really make sure we can serve that population adequately. Donated properties, a little bit of a change there, trying to make it a little bit easier to get points in that category. Recognizing that there just really isn't that much cheap land out there. There isn't that big HPE free land everywhere all throughout the city. So we've seen that throughout the district too. It's not just in New York City. issue. It's happening everywhere. There's just not affordable land anymore. And obviously without that, you can't develop any housing. So the threshold for getting the 3 points on the donated, so that would be, you'd get 5 points if it was $1,000 or less. If it's between 10 and 50% of fair market value, we've changed that as opposed to 10 to 30%. So you can be getting land for half off and still get at least 3 points in that category. So making it a little bit easier. We hope that moves the needle. We hope it makes it easier for you to maybe negotiate the price on the land in order to get those extra points. So owner-occupied projects, which I don't think that is something that's going to be relevant to a lot of the audience members today, but we did make it easier to get the full 20 points in that scoring category. The way our formula worked, it just didn't reach that full point threshold with the households there. So it makes it a little bit easier to get points in the owner-occupied project. Mostly for us, that is upstate New York. Single-family home rehabilitation projects. We do a lot of work in the Rochester area, Albany area. These are just single-family homes that need a new roof, new heating systems, windows, what have you. So probably not what you guys are going to be going for, but we did make a little bit of an improvement there. The subsidy per unit category, we reduced from 10 to 5 points. This is a category that rewards you for more efficient use of AHP subsidy. We took that down because we didn't really think it was having as much of an impact as those points could elsewhere. Again, reallocating those to affordable supportive housing, homeless housing. I think I might have skipped over the rental housing for extremely low income. That's a new scoring category also for reserving 20% of units at 30% AMI. So that's a new one too. I think I might have missed that one, but that goes part and parcel with homeless housing, with supportive housing, all that stuff that is often found in these different subsidy streams. So we reduced subsidy per unit down a little bit and then shuffled some of those points over, while at the same time increasing preservation of affordable housing from 8 to 10 points. And that again had to do with a lot of the discussions that we had over the past year with various affordable housing developers, understanding the threat to the housing stock when units could go market rate, really needing to assist those LIHTC deals that are up for renewal to get the regulatory standards to make sure that those units are still affordable. We wanted to assist with that effort, recognizing how vital that is to our district. So we actually increased preservation from 8 to 10 points. So, there it is, new scoring category. So I didn't skip it. Oh, good. So new scoring category, rental housing for extremely low income households, 6 points. This is going to be one where all you're going to need to do is show on your rental income verification forms, your rent plan, your development budget, that you're targeting 20% of your units to the 30% AMI. This is a new one for us. It's a no-brainer. It's a population that needs to be served. We took a look at our portfolio. We found that it's achievable already for a lot of the sponsors that are us with projects. They just need that little bit of extra assistance on the gap financing there. I want to point out one thing that's really important though when you're thinking about putting your package together. So rental housing for extremely low income households, supportive housing, and homeless housing. As I talked about earlier, those are three distinct scoring categories for us. And I know that's probably a lot different than a lot of your other funders, but for us, it's really key to keep that in mind. We're also going to award 6 points for each one, but we're going to have a max of 12 points in that category. And that's just so that projects that may have a lot of subsidy, a lot of support, can't gobble up all the points in that category. So what you'll want to do when you're looking at the underserved communities and population scoring category, that's where you have the extremely low income, homeless, and supportive, is pick the two that you can prove the best, right? When you look at our documentation requirements. If you're doing supportive housing, if you have those subsidies lined up, it's going to be easy for you to prove up to those 12 points there, but just take a look at that. Make sure you're reading through the application and make sure you're presenting it to us in a way that makes sense. But again, there's going to be that cap on choosing 2 out of 3, just to make it fair and give everybody the opportunity to try to get some points in that category. So the next new one, the high opportunity area. So high opportunity for us means something probably a lot different than what you're used to when you're thinking about the social science literature on it and what a high opportunity is in terms of schools and crime and access to community resources. We don't have the luxury of having a different funding round for senior housing or for family housing like some state agencies do. In New Jersey, they have a senior round, multifamily round, where in that case, high opportunity can mean a lot of different things, right? It might mean something different for seniors than it would for children. So for us, when we're getting 120 applications every year, there's no consistency, right? There's very little theme. We have large 200-unit projects in the Bronx, and like I said, these small 20 or 25 single-family homes in Rochester that need that new roof, right? So it's such a diverse set of applications that we wanted to land on a high opportunity area index that tried to just serve as a proxy for all of those. And we just didn't have the resources available to come up with a really sophisticated metric or index or anything like that. So for us, high opportunity is just going to be median family income in the census tract of that state or that territory. So if you're building in a tract that is 120% of the state median family income, which I realize is a little bit different. A lot of folks use county when they're measuring AMI. Obviously, we'll be doing that for our targeting, but for high opportunity area, we're taking a little bit bigger look at that. And Brian, if there's Q&A on that, Brian did a lot of work on that and can explain that better. But we wanted to do something that was simple and also easy for you to identify and prove by just using census data. If the project is also mixed income, where you're keeping some higher AMI units in the targeting plan, you'll also get 5 points for that max of 10. So new scoring categories continued. So green building innovation, this is a new one for us. We had an energy efficiency scoring category a few years ago. We kind of phased it out because it didn't really have much teeth. We felt like we were awarding points to projects that were just following state and local guidelines anyway. Maybe they're doing, LEED Silver or Energy Star. So it really wasn't differentiating any of the projects from one another. Everybody was picking up those 5 points. We didn't take a very close look at what they were doing for energy efficiency. We just knew they were doing something, right? We just didn't really have a good handle on what we should be focusing on when it comes to green building. So this scoring category is really going to be a reach for a lot of you who are going to be applying for our program. So we're only going to be awarding up to 5 points in this category for passive house development or net zero energy design, or rehab projects that can attest that they'll be significantly reducing their energy use. In our implementation plan, which we have online and we can send the link to, goes through the documentation requirements. The reason that we are focusing on these specific green energy technologies, and we realize they're expensive, we realize that they're hard to do, but when we talk to the HCR and we talk to New Jersey's FHA, we just realized that it's just such a comprehensive set of guidelines and requirements, and it was just too much for us to really try to say, let's offer 10 or 12 different things and try to let people piece together what energy efficiency technologies they're putting into their building. Let's do passive house, let's do net zero. Those are really on the forefront of construction design these days. States and localities are only getting more and more stringent when it comes to their green energy guidelines. Let's take a couple that we know we can recognize easy, We can document easily. We can work with the applicant and the developers to make sure that it's going to meet those passive house designs, that it's going to have that net zero energy output, or if it's a rehab project, it can reduce its energy use. We talk to a lot of agencies. We spent a lot of time with NYSERDA. We also got an awful lot of assistance from Enterprise. I want to give them a shout out if they're on the line, because they were fantastic in helping us develop this scoring category. So the reason we introduced it is because it's just a top district need right now. We really want to be able to encourage green energy, and we also just know that these are the top tier technologies for that. So if you're doing passive house or net zero, or you have that rehab project that's going to really cut down on energy use, reach out to us now. It's a new scoring category for us. We're not sure exactly what the applications are going to look like, but why don't you give us a call and we'll help you kind of figure out what you should be submitting for that application package. Another new category that Brian alluded to earlier is member financial participation. So our goal over the past year and continuing into this year is to get our 300 member banks, our bank is a cooperative, to get our 300 member banks throughout our district more involved with affordable housing lending and investing. So what we're focusing on here is trying to take our banks, which range from large commercial banks to small savings and loans institutions and federal credit unions, more comfortable and just more aware of the business opportunities they might have with giving a construction loan or even a permanent loan to an affordable housing project, while also applying for that AHP grant with that developer. So if you have a good relationship with a member bank who submits your application for you every year, now is a good time to reach out to them and say, hey, I can get up to 6 points if you can give me a construction loan or some sort of permanent loan on my project. It may be too late now, we realize, as the round is going to open up pretty soon. But now is the time to start maybe thinking about that for future projects, and just knowing that if you're able to secure financing from one of our members, and they're also going to put the AHP grant in for you, you'd be able to get that 6 points if we can prove that it's a firm commitment. It can't be a term sheet or a letter of interest or something like that. It has to be firm commitment from that member. There's also an option for a small cash grant. You'll get 2 points for that, but that's really designed more for small projects that don't take on any debt, or these, like I said, these small single family home projects where there's no debt at all in it, no construction financing, nothing. So if you want to get that 6 points, you want to talk to your members about getting construction loans, things like that. It's also use it as an opportunity to just make them aware of affordable housing lending. So if you're going to Wells Fargo, if you're going to TD, maybe talk to your member bank about, hey, this is what we need. Are you able to maybe secure something for us? So just an opportunity for you to get more comfortable talking to the member institution about putting some real funding into your project. So we're excited about that one. Again, probably more of a next year category for most people if you've already closed on your financing, or if you already have your commitments lined up. But conversations that you could start having now for future projects. So in addition to all the new categories and to all the refinements we've made to existing categories, we're going to be sending a few off and saying goodbye. Empowerment activities, which I know a lot of you are doing in your projects, and working with your residents on financial literacy and having tenants associations, social service workers. Previously, we would have given you bonus points for that under the empowerment activities category. That picked up a lot of points for a lot of projects, but it just led to an awful lot of confusion and instances of modifications on projects down the road, which threatened funding because the empowerment activities never happened, or the nonprofit organization that was supposed to run those activities fell through, or a myriad of reasons that we found once the project was done and into our monitoring phases. When we went to look at empowerment activities, we just felt like in too many instances, they just weren't adequate. So we're getting rid of that. No more of that at all. If you have empowerment activities with a project with us now, you still have to continue to do that, but you'll no longer be able to pick up points at application for that. DDA QCT, we're removing that. We've got the high opportunity area now. DDA QCT, we talked to a lot of think tanks. We talked to a lot of researchers. We talked to our staff who's been working in the program for decades. We couldn't really land on why we had that category in the first place, other than YTech does it, and state CRAPs do it. You know, just didn't really make a whole lot of sense for us to keep it in there when we could be reallocating those points to really hitting those district needs. So no more DDA QCT, no more desirable sites as well, where you would have to submit a Google map showing that you were within, you know, a mile of a train station and a grocer, things like that. Led to a lot of confusion, led to a lot of documentation errors, and it was just not a very practical category, even though we want to encourage that type of development. But again, you know, hopefully this high opportunity area will serve as a proxy for that sort of development near good schools and transit and grocery. So those will be out. You know, if you're thinking about those for this year, you know, you can't count on those any longer. And Brian, I'll hand it over to you for some final thoughts.
Sure, thanks, Jacob. So Jacob made a really good point earlier about the danger of looking back to last year's categories, last year's scoring, to see how your project would, you know, gain points or lose points. You know, this year it's really a whole new year, and last year, you know, at this time we could be pretty confident about what the you know, the winning scores would be. We had gotten pretty used to it. It was the third year of the same categories, and we knew, you know, if you were in the mid to upper 60s, you were probably in a pretty good place in terms of points, assuming you could document everything to our satisfaction. This year, it's just harder to predict, and it's really new for everybody, and that's for you, for us, and for your competition. And so the important thing is that you start early, you go through the implementation plan, and you identify where you might be able to pick up points, and then you have a conversation with an analyst at the Home Loan Bank, and you really figure out how you're going to be able to document each and every point. And not just document it, something that Jacob touches on, you know, just about every presentation he gives, is how valuable a narrative is for each scoring category. Some of the categories Jacob discussed, whether it's, you know, green building innovation or member participation, you know, there are some nuances that we're going to have to learn alongside you all. And if you can provide, you know, a few sentences, a couple of paragraphs that just says, this is the documentation I submitted, you know, on page 12, you'll find this key thing that you asked for in the implementation plan. You know, I can't tell you how helpful that will be in reducing any ambiguity that our analysts have, and really building confidence that your project deserves the points in that category. I'd say you heard a lot of changes and a lot of kind of rationale and motivation from Jacob's presentation on the categories. That's really an ongoing process for us. You know, we don't like to make big changes every single year, but we're still trying to learn about the impacts of the categories, where they're working in terms of supporting unmet needs, where they're working for, you know, fitting with the capabilities of sponsors and their partners. And so please do continue as this round rolls out, and in, you know, the coming years, reach out directly to us through the network, through our Affordable Housing Advisory Council. You can find a list of those folks, those 15 folks, on our website. The advocacy really matters, and it really works, and we'd love to keep learning and improving. So a lot of the, I'll give one last plug for speaking with our analysts. A lot of the questions that we've received through that Q&A function, and we've got a few more minutes, so feel free to keep flooding that. As long as I'm talking, Jacob's the one answering them. So the more questions, the better. But many of the questions that have come in so far have been about particular requirements for each category. Whether it's the supportive housing category specifically or others. The full list will be there in the implementation plan. You've got about a page of requirements, description, at least for each category. We're very specific. And then within the application package itself, which will be available when the round launches, there's even more direction, even more specificity. And of course, if you don't understand anything, please do reach out. We want to get high quality applications. The analysts don't want to be in a position of surprising sponsors. That's really the worst thing. Jacob mentioned that sometimes a sponsor will self-score their application, and then the analyst will look through all the documentation and see, well, this actually doesn't meet what the sponsor expected. And then down the line, the sponsor doesn't get an award. We have like kind of a debriefing call. Maybe some of you have participated in that. Kind of a debriefing call with the sponsor after the round's over to explain why a specific project didn't get an award. And that's really the worst conversation, is to say, you sponsor expected to get points in this category, but you didn't document it as we expected, or you didn't explain it as we expected. And had you reached out, had you sought technical assistance, you really could have gotten those points. That's kind of a horrible conversation to have, and we want you all to avoid that. We don't want to see a drop off between your self score and the score that our analysts ultimately award to your project. So maybe Jacob, are there any questions that you? I've seen a couple questions, and maybe Jacob, I can ask you to respond to it about member financial participation.
Yeah.
And whether tax credits are part of that, or any other potential components besides the ones you identified.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. I was looking at a couple of these, and I was starting to type, but I feel like it'd be better to kind of have the discussion and talk about the context a little bit. So when it comes to tax credit investments, our members, most of them, like I said, are smaller. That was the reason the Federal Home Loan Bank was established by Congress in the 30s, was to get money into small savings and loans institutions so that they could issue mortgages and compete with larger banks. So, the majority of our membership has no idea about low-income housing tax credits. A lot of them just don't know anything about lending and affordable housing anyway. They don't have the capacity to go out and do that. If anything, maybe they can get involved with a syndicator or a fund. But we're trying to make sure that it's fair across the board. So we have large members like Citi, who are very sophisticated and very savvy, and can do that, gobble up all those points, as opposed to the small, federal credit unions that just don't have the capacity to do that. And the key, though, is that we've been doing a lot of outreach with our members and saying to them, what other ways besides a construction loan or a permanent loan could you get involved with an affordable housing project? A line of credit, letter of credit, something like that. There's another question about bond financing. That's another one that our smaller members kind of struggle with. However, some of them are able to do it. We've talked with members who have done bond financing on AHP projects. Just looking at the Q&A real quick. So that's something we'd like to potentially add in the future. The bond financing for us has also been very difficult for us to sort of pin down at the application, whether or not those were firm allocations, firm commitments. But if you are asking these kinds of questions, please reach out to us, because what we've been trying to do is facilitate a conversation between our members and the developers who put those projects together. So we had a small savings and loan bank in New Jersey who was committing funds to a 20-unit project. They were going to give a $6 million construction loan. That's the kind of stuff we want to see more of when trying to balance the interests of these smaller members, these smaller institutions. So if you're curious about that, or you're wondering what financial products could be considered for that, we want to hear from you because we want to enhance this scoring category in the future. So we don't like to change our categories all the time, but this is something where maybe next year we'll say, okay, if we can be comfortable that all our members would at least have a shot at doing some sort of bond financing, or could you maybe a line of credit to a project? Let's add that into this category. So yeah, something we're always working on and trying to hopefully get better with. But that's a great question. Let's see. I see a question here for projects. I don't know what happened to it.
Oh, sorry. I just answered it, but maybe I'll take it.
Okay.
Take it, which is important. So we've talked a lot about some of the uncertainty this year, given that it's a new batch of scoring criteria for everyone. So many sponsors may wonder, is this the right year to put in an application, or should I wait until things shake out a bit in next year's round? The thing I would say is it's really going to depend on your project. We can accept applications, at any point in the project life cycle, assuming you have a funding gap and there's still work that needs to be done. So even projects that are under construction come in for an application, and so it's possible to wait. There may be other benefits of waiting. Our project readiness category rewards projects that have most of their other funding committed. So that may be another advantage of waiting. However, you may find that putting together an application package isn't too onerous given what you're already doing for your other funders, right? You already have pro forma, you already have, so many documents related to your project. You may find that just go for it this year, see what happens, and then if you really need to come back, you'll have another crack at it, another chance to talk with the analyst, another chance to improve your application. It's really going to depend on your own organization and your own project's needs. Anything else, Jacob, that you've seen in the Q&A that you think is worth addressing?
Yeah, there was a question about the underserved communities and populations. So that's the extremely low income, the supportive housing units and the homeless housing units, whether or not they could that be the same unit, different unit. So we take a look at each scoring category individually. So if your targeting shows 30% extremely low income, you get your points there. If your supportive housing has the supportive housing services plan, the supportive housing services agreement, identifies all the information in that documentation that we require, you'll get your points there. Same thing for homeless housing, if you meet all the documentation requirements. We don't sort of cross-review all that and say, well, is it unit 1? Is it unit 2? Which is which? We look pretty discreetly at each scoring category and give the points out like that. Then, of course, down the road, when you get to the monitoring stages, we just want to make sure you're reserving those units for the population that you specify. But we don't look to see that is it the same unit, different unit. The only thing we don't allow is taking one supportive housing unit and saying, well, I'm reserving this for 5 different types of supporting housing populations, isn't that 5 units? That's the only thing that we would not allow in terms of like double counting. But otherwise, no, it just follows those documentation requirements. That's really all we look at.
That's great. Thanks, Jacob. A number of folks have asked if these slides will be made available. Certainly, we'll send this deck to the network and you'll be able to have access to them, which will be helpful for the next few weeks. Although, honestly, I think your time is better spent looking at the implementation plan and being sure to sign up for one of the coming technical presentations in late February and throughout March. Those presentations will be much more detailed, especially around what kind of documentation is required for each and every scoring category. So go to the Home Loan Bank website. If you can't find the right spot, let us know, look for that implementation plan, and go through those categories. That I think that'll be really helpful preparation as you start to think about this year's round. But really, really thank you all for joining. Thank you for listening. And yeah, looking forward to seeing a lot of great applications.
Yep, likewise. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it. And, we're always available. Reach out. The New York focused webinar will be March 10th. There will be one that's more New Jersey focused on February 24th. If you want to get ahead, they're not going to be that much different. But March 10th will be sort of like the metro New York area, and we'll be sending out that information soon. So thanks again. Take care. Good luck.